Welcome to the podcast, Philippe. And today, we're going to take a deep dive into something called the Matilda Effect.
Okay.
And we're using NotebookLM's Discover function as our lens today. We're going to sort of explore what this is, the history of the Matilda Effect, and why understanding it matters when we want to try to understand and recognize women's contributions in science.
Right.
And also, just real quick before we forget, we're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube today. So please go there and subscribe to the channel if you can. It really helps us out.
I will.
Okay, cool. So jumping right into it, one thing that's kind of fascinating to me is this this idea of the effacement or the invisibilization of women. It's kind of like a recurring thing throughout history and across many cultures where women and, I guess, female references are sort of hidden or just made invisible.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not just about memory fading away.
Right.
It's actually happening in very real ways in public spaces still today.
Yeah.
If you think about how cities are planned or even the way things are named, it can be subtly excluding women or overlooking them. And
yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, this whole phenomenon, it's sometimes called cryptogeny or mentrification. And it's really gained traction in research since the 2010s with scientists and technologists and artists and even people in politics.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're starting to really dig into this and look at how all these related issues connect and show up.
So it's like this pervasive
Yeah, very much so.
thing in our culture.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so within the sciences, obviously one specific form of this invisibilization is what we call the Matilda Effect.
Right.
So what exactly are we talking about when we say the Matilda Effect?
So the Matilda Effect is basically this persistent way that women's contributions to scientific research are denied, or they're downplayed, or sometimes even worse, they're just straight up attributed to their male colleagues.
Oh, wow.
And it's more than just being overlooked. It's actually having your work credited to someone else.
Yeah, it's like active erasure almost.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay, and so this isn't a new observation, is it? I mean, this has its own history.
That's right. It's not new at all. Actually, this was something that was first pointed out back in 1870 by Matilda Joslyn Gage, who was a suffragette and an abolitionist. And she wrote an essay called Woman as Inventor, where she talked about this very thing.
Wow.
But even though she talked about it back then, the term Matilda Effect, it wasn't actually coined until 1993 by a science historian named Margaret W. Rossiter. And she was the one who really recognized this as a recurring pattern that deserved to have its own name.
I mean, it's kind of interesting to me how sometimes it takes so long for something to be officially recognized with a name.
Yeah, it's kind of wild.
Even though people have noticed it for centuries before that.
Totally.
Interesting. Okay. So our sources mention something called the Matthew Effect. So how does the Matilda Effect kind of relate to that idea?
Yeah, that's an important connection to make. So the Matthew Effect basically says that scientists who are already prominent, they tend to get more credit for discoveries, even if they're working with other people who aren't as well known, or even if they make those discoveries around the same time as someone else.
Okay.
So basically it's saying that famous scientists tend to get more of the spotlight, and the Matilda Effect kind of takes that idea and adds another layer of bias on top of it, specifically against women.
Right.
So if you're a woman scientist, your contributions are even more likely to be overshadowed or even completely ignored.
So it's like this existing tendency to favor the already famous.
Yeah.
And then the Matilda Effect just kind of makes that even worse for women.
Exactly. It's like a double whammy.
Wow. Okay, so can you give us a really clear example from history of how this is actually played out?
Sure. So let's go back to the 18th century and talk about Jeanne Baret. She was the first woman to circumnavigate the globe.
Wow.
But to do that, she actually had to disguise herself as a man to join Louis-Antoine de Bougainville's expedition. And while she was on this expedition, she worked really closely with the botanist Philibert Commerson. And together, they made some pretty big botanical discoveries, including discovering the bougainvillea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Even though they worked together, most of their discoveries, over 70 different plant species, they were all credited to Commerson.
Oh, God.
And a lot of them were even named after him.
So she was completely cut out of the picture.
Pretty much, yeah. It wasn't until the 21st century that Baret finally got some recognition.
Wow, that's a long time.
I know, right?
She waited for credit. They named a species after her called Solanum baratiae. But for centuries, her contributions were basically erased from history.
That's a powerful example of how deep and long-lasting this erasure can be.
Yeah, it really is.
Like, it's not just a one-time thing. It can affect how people are remembered for generations. Were there any similar instances of this kind of thing happening closer to our own time? Yeah, absolutely. So in the 1950s, Marthe Gautier, she made a really important discovery about Down syndrome. She figured out that children with Down syndrome have an extra chromosome.
Wow, that's huge.
Right. But most of the credit for this discovery went to a guy named Jérôme Lejeune. And even though Gautier's name was on the publication about the finding in 1959, it was listed second. And get this, they even misspelled her name.
Wow, they couldn't even be bothered to spell her name right.
It's unbelievable, right? So even though she was involved, her role in this huge breakthrough was significantly diminished.
Wow, it's really striking to see these patterns just repeating across different centuries and different fields of science.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how many other women's contributions have been hidden like this.
Yeah, it really makes you think how much we might not know because of this.
Right, how much history has been sort of skewed.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so I know you mentioned a few other examples earlier, but could you maybe go into a little bit more detail about some other women whose contributions were overlooked or attributed to men?
Sure. So one example is Mileva Marić. She was Einstein's first wife. And there's still a lot of debate about how much she contributed to his early work. Some people think she played a major role, but her contributions are often downplayed or completely dismissed.
Yeah, it's like history likes to paint these geniuses as like solitary figures.
Right, exactly.
And it ignores the fact that they probably had a lot of support and collaboration from other people.
Exactly. And then you have someone like Lise Meitner. She did some really important work on nuclear fission. But when it came time to award the Nobel Prize for that work, it only went to her male collaborator.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so even when women are involved in groundbreaking research, they don't always get the recognition they deserve.
Right, and that's a problem that continues to this day.
Absolutely.
Okay, so another example is Esther Lederberg. She was a pioneer in bacterial genetics.
Right, a brilliant scientist.
But often her discoveries were overshadowed by her husband's work.
Yeah, it's so frustrating to see that happen over and over again.
Yeah, it's like the system is set up to kind of automatically credit the man, even when a woman is equally or even more involved.
Right. It's like there's this default assumption that the man is the one driving the research.
Yeah, it's a real problem.
Yeah.
And then there's Nettie Stevens, who did crucial work on sex chromosomes. But a lot of the credit for that went to Thomas Hunt Mergen.
Yeah, another example of a woman's work being overshadowed.
It's like a never-ending story, unfortunately.
It really is. And we can't forget about figures like Ada Lovelace, who's considered by many to be the mother of modern computing.
Right.
And Henrietta Swan Leavitt, the astronomer. Her work was fundamental for figuring out how to measure distances in space.
Wow, she basically helped us understand the scale of the universe.
Exactly, but these women are often not as well known as they should be.
Yeah, it's like their contributions are kind of hidden in the footnotes of history.
It's like they're there, but they're not given the same prominence as the men.
Yeah. It's a real shame. Okay, so we've talked about all these historical examples, but it seems like the underrepresentation of women in science is still a major issue today.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just a thing of the past, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, our sources mentioned that less than 30% of researchers worldwide are women, and only 3% of science Nobel Prizes have been awarded to women.
It's a pretty stark reminder that we haven't come as far as we'd like to think.
Yeah, those numbers are really sobering. So it's like these biases, they haven't just disappeared. They're still very much present.
Right, and they're holding women back in science.
Okay. I remember reading about this idea of a leaky pipeline in STEM fields. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so the leaky pipeline is basically this metaphor that describes how women are lost from STEM fields at different stages of their careers.
Okay.
So for instance, globally, women earn about 32% of bachelor's degrees in science and technology, but that number drops to about a quarter when you look at doctorates.
Oh, wow. So even though they're entering STEM fields at a decent rate, they're not staying and advancing at the same rate as men.
Exactly.
So it's like the pipeline is leaking women at every stage.
That's the idea. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just about getting women into science, it's about making sure they can stay and thrive there.
Absolutely. We need to address the reasons why they're leaving.
Yeah, it's not enough to just fix the entry point. We need to look at the whole system.
Exactly.
Okay, and this leaking, it seems like it continues even after women achieve a certain level of success in their careers.
Yeah, that's the really frustrating part. Even when women get tenure in academia, they tend to advance more slowly than men. You see fewer women in leadership positions like full professorships or other influential roles within scientific institutions.
So it's like they hit a certain point and then they hit this invisible ceiling.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
And that suggests that the Matilda Effect And other forms of bias, they're still holding women back.
Right, even when they've proven themselves.
Wow. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners about the Matilda effect?
Well, I think the most important thing is to recognize that the Matilda effect is real and it's still happening.
Right.
And it's a symptom of a much larger problem, which is the way society tends to overlook or undervalue women's contributions. And if we want to have a more accurate and equitable understanding of science and every other field, then we need to acknowledge these biases and start actively working to overcome them.
It's like we can't just pretend that the playing field is level.
Right. We need to actually do something to make it level.
Okay, so it's good to know that there are at least some efforts being made to address this. Our sources mentioned a few initiatives like the L'Oreal UNESCO for Women in Science program.
Yeah, that's a great program.
So what does that program do exactly?
So they work to increase the visibility of women scientists, and they challenge those old perceptions that we've been talking about, the ones that say women aren't as capable in science.
Okay, so it's like they're actively trying to change the narrative.
Exactly.
But it sounds like these programs are only one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Right. It's not a quick fix.
So what other changes need to happen to really address this issue at its core?
I think we need to see systemic changes across the board in scientific culture, in academia, and society as a whole. We need to fight those inherent biases that are baked into the system.
Right. It's not just about individual actions. It's about changing the institutions themselves.
Right. And we need to deal with issues like harassment. And we need to create environments where women feel safe and supported.
So it's about creating a culture where women can actually thrive.
Exactly. And we need to stop pretending that science is this purely objective meritocracy, because it's not. The system is biased against women.
Okay, so it's like we need to acknowledge the problem before we can fix it.
Exactly.
And I think it's also important to have a more inclusive view of what counts as a valuable contribution to science.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, not everyone needs to be a tenured professor to make a difference.
Right. We need to recognize and value all the different ways that people can contribute to science, whether they go into government or industry or even start their own companies.
Yeah, it's like success shouldn't just be measured by publications and grants.
Totally. There are so many ways to be a scientist.
Yeah, we need to celebrate all of them. Okay, this has been a really interesting conversation. It's made me think a lot about the Matilda effect and the broader issue of women's invisibilization. And it's made me wonder about all the potential that we're missing out on when talented people are overlooked or not given the recognition they deserve.
Yeah, it's a real loss for everyone.
So as a final thought for our listeners, I want to leave you with this question. How do you think a greater recognition and support of women in science could fundamentally change our understanding of the world? And how could it accelerate scientific discovery? I think it's something worth pondering. So thank you for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.